boy had always been a bit of a loner. He lived in an old, isolated house on the edge of town, with no neighbors for miles around. His parents had died when he was young, and he had been left to fend for himself ever since. But as he grew older, the solitude and silence began to take its toll on his mind. At first, he would hear things, whispers in the dark or footsteps that seemed to come from nowhere. He tried to ignore them, to tell himself that it was just his imagination. But as time went on, the hallucinations became more intense. He would see shadowy figures lurking in the corners of his room, or strange, distorted faces staring back at him in the mirror. They would taunt him, telling him he was alone, that no one cared about him. The boy became more and more isolated, spending all of his time in his room, too afraid to venture out into the world. But then, something terrifying began to happen. The hallucinations started to become real. The shadowy figures that had haunted him for so long began to not only move, but to take on a life of their own. They would whisper to him, promising to be his friends, to keep him company in his solitude. At first, the boy was grateful for their company, but as time went on, he began to realize they were not his friends at all. They would lead him down dark corridors or out into the cold, moonless night, always promising to show him something wonderful, something that would make him happy beyond his wildest dreams. But as they led him deeper into the darkness, the boy began to realize that they were leading him towards something much darker. One night, as he followed the shadowy figures down a narrow, winding path, the boy came face to face with the source of his hallucinations. It was a twisted, monstrous creature with razor-sharp teeth and glowing eyes. It seemed to be made of darkness and shadow, and it reached out to grab the boy, to pull him into its embrace. The boy did not want to go quietly. He fought back with all his strength, refusing to let the darkness consume him. But as he struggled, the hallucinations began to grow larger, more vivid, until he was surrounded by them in the dead of night. And at last, he caved, and felt the icy cold embrace of the shadow figure as it drew him into its chest. The last thing he saw were all of his hallucinations that had been haunting him, merging and becoming one entity, wriggling and writhing and morphing into something obscenely horrifying. He closed his eyes and took one last breath before being consumed. Thank you for listening and watching. All links and references are in the description below.